Okay, let's do this. It's 10:30 on the dot. So, hey everyone, welcome to this webinar today. Before we start, I'd just like to thank everyone who's logging in. There's still a few people jumping in. I really want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to attend today's session on building a positive safety culture at work. My name is Mandy and I work within the HR Assured New Zealand team and the marketing team. And today I'll be co-hosting our webinar with our presenter, Vaughan Grenier. So you can see Vaughan up on the screen. And here is a slide with Vaughan's picture on it as well. So Vaughan is our Workplace Relations Manager at HR Assured New Zealand. He has over 24 years experience in international human resources, health and safety and workplace relations management, and over 10 years working in New Zealand and Australian companies. Vaughan provides in-depth support to leadership across all areas of HR, health and safety and employee relations. So we're in safe hands today. And before I bring Vaughan into the conversation, if you're not familiar with HR Assured, we help small to medium businesses with all things workplace compliance so that you can focus on cultivating a strong culture, growing your business, and achieving other company goals that you might have. But I'll talk more about HR Assured at the end of this presentation. Vaughan, thanks so much for being here to host this session with us today. What are we going to learn?
Hi, Mandy, and hi, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm hoping that everyone will walk away from this session today understanding what are the benefits of a positive safety culture, what is the role of health and safety compliance in building that safety culture. Then I'll take us through some practical steps to get everyone in your organization on board with a new health and safety culture. And we'll also finally be looking at some of the changes and trends, especially in the world since 2020 and COVID-19, that have impacted health and safety management in the workplace today.
Awesome. Let's begin then. I thought we could start from the very start. What is a positive safety culture? Is it just a buzzword?
It's not a buzzword, Mandy. The positive safety culture is the next level in safety culture. A lot of companies have developed some level of safety culture, and what we're looking at here is taking it to the absolute maximum the positive safety culture can be for an organization. So looking at MBIE's report, they basically define a positive safety culture as being how we do things around here, even when no one is looking. All of our behaviors reflect how we think, our assumptions, our beliefs, and our attitudes. And in a strong safety culture, everyone has a shared safety mindset and works together to achieve common goals. So basically, the takeaway from this quote is that positive safety culture requires cultural change. And culture is key to improving the health and safety in our organizations. A cultural approach doesn't replace other approaches. So safety often involves engineering changes or system changes, but it underpins those and makes them even more successful. A culture shift on health and safety brings all employees on board and orientates them towards the same goals with the same commitment. And just a little bit of a clarification around this. Most safety cultures are top-down driven, and this happens because of a sense of urgency at an executive level. So that urgency can come from many things. Usually it comes from the risk of fines or jail. It could come from guilt around a safety incident, or in the best case, genuine care for employees. That urgency, though, is often not translated into an awareness and an urgency for all employees. For some reason, it stays at the top levels of the organization. But a positive safety culture is a 360-degree culture where the value of safety is understood equally and it's equally urgent throughout the whole organization. And everybody shares a commitment to making the workplace safer every single day.
Okay, cool. So we understand a bit more about what a positive safety culture is. I'm curious about the difference a positive safety culture can make in a business. What are the benefits?
Well, the most obvious one is fewer accidents, injuries, and lost time. But there's a lot of other benefits that go with that, including productivity. So when well-being and satisfaction are really high, team performance and productivity is also high. When work is done safely, it hardly ever has to stop for accidents or for the management of risk. And when you have health and safety meetings or toolbox talks, they are shorter and people can get on with the job of doing the work that they're paid to do. Work is also usually done very economically and very effectively when it's done the safest way possible. So when risks have been assessed and risk management is built into the work process, everybody can basically just get on with the work. And we can trust each other's processes and the way we do the work. You'll see a massive difference between that and a culture where there's low trust and low discipline. In that culture, the way work is done depends a lot on who showed you and who leads you. So the company hasn't clarified the way things must be done. It's left to the old school mentors and teachers. Your safety ends up being your own concern, and the person to watch out for most can sometimes be an undisciplined coworker. In the safety positive culture, safety is everyone's concern, and keeping each other safe means we keep ourselves safe.
Okay, so it sounds like a positive safety culture has many benefits for business, and I think it's really interesting that, I mean, it makes sense really that it ties into if your employees feel safe and have a safe working environment and their well-being is high, then their performance will be increased as well. So yeah, is it quite common for organisations to have a strong safety culture in New Zealand?
Well, unfortunately, safety culture in New Zealand is not at the place most people would like to think it is. This quote from WorkSafe is really telling. It says, "We need to grow the 1 in 5 workplaces with a mature safety culture to 100%. 1 in 5 basically means there are 80% of workplaces in New Zealand that WorkSafe feels do not have an adequate safety culture." So what happened was when the new laws were passed in 2050, there was a honeymoon period of great activity and effort to comply with new concepts and standards. So there were lots of safety practitioners getting in and getting things done. That initial effort did not last, and after an initial period of success, the level of safety compliance and injury prevention has actually declined. So the statistics show that non-fatal injuries were seriously reducing up until 2016, but this progress has begun to stall. Work-related injuries that result in more than a week away from work have recently been on the rise again, and the rates of serious injury have risen in the past 2 years. That basically means, in the words of WorkSafe, we need to reinvigorate our efforts, which is why there's been a discussion around this positive safety culture. For me,
Oh, excuse you. Yeah, those are some pretty serious facts, huh? Oh.
my apologies, everyone.
Those are some pretty serious facts. It's quite a, yeah, quite.
Yeah, so this ladder here indicates the different levels of a safety culture. So you have the pathological safety culture, which is really where nobody cares about safety at all, and if you get hurt, it's your own fault. There's a reactive safety culture where safety is important, but there was a once-off decision to do something about it, and after that we wait for accidents before we do something more. Management culture, we have systems in place to manage all the hazards. Proactive cultures, we have systems and we keep them continually improving. But a positive safety culture is when it stops being a leadership down culture, which the other 4 can be, and becomes a everybody culture. So in my view, sadly, I encounter many firms that acknowledge safety is important, but don't develop a culture around it. It's incident-based and not prevention-based. Most companies are at this reactive stage, which is where I've put the arrow, but nobody likes acknowledging that about themselves. So they tend to believe, and in their internal conversations, they'll classify themselves as either management level or proactive level when they're not. They're still at a reactive stage. But this means that they don't put the effort in to get themselves up to the next level because they already have convinced themselves that they're there. What I like to analogize this to is that not making a decision about health and safety is still making a decision, but it's like taking your hands off the steering wheel when you're driving a car. You're still driving, you're just driving very, very badly. So I believe from my research that most New Zealand companies have a lot of work still to do around safety. The initial work was done, but then efforts have slowed and safety's become a function of luck. Mostly good luck, but sometimes poor luck. And reactive companies make real changes only when an incident or an injury reveals a weakness, and this needs to change to make improvements regardless of incidences and injuries, and in fact, in order to make sure that they don't happen in the first place.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. And it's such a call to action from WorkSafe as well. It sounds like, despite its benefits, a true positive safety culture at work is not as common as we might think, and that it takes a bit of time to build as well. Which takes me to my next question: How would you start to build? How would you start to go about building a positive safety culture in the workplace?
Well, that's a really good question because we're talking about change processes now. So, a
Yeah.
change process around health and safety will always start as a top down process. Somebody has to make the decision that it's the right thing to do and we have to do it. But after that, the change process must become a self sustaining, bottom up process, a proactive approach to safety that employees own for themselves and leadership guides but does not have to drive. That's really important.
Yeah, that's a great one-liner. Leadership guides that doesn't have to drive.
So I find that it's easy to understand what a positive safety culture means and how to build it by breaking it down into four key elements. So the first key element is compliance, which is the foundation of everything. The second one is a positive leadership attitude and investment. The third one is effective worker participation, which is the bottom-up culture we've just talked about. And then the fourth one is proactive improvement. It's trying to get us to a position where we no longer rely on accidents and risks to tell us where the problems are, but we find new ways to discover how we can be better at safety without putting our employees at risk.
Awesome.
So the
So you go.
Yep. So the first thing about the safety cultures, element one is compliance. Okay, so you have to know what you need to do and what the issues are. And that comes down to an intimate knowledge of the law and your own industry requirements. You start by having a health and safety system that can be measured and improved on. So you have your structure, you have your paperwork, your policies, your processes, and you have something that you can measure and see whether there's a gap between what you do and what you're supposed to do, and then you can improve upon that gap. So that involves a lot of auditing, a lot of checking, and a lot of going back and reworking things to make sure you get up to the right level. Now, as the old saying goes, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So having that system in place and that structure gives you something to work towards. The system will give you a benchmark and enable you to improve month on month against previous benchmarks. It's really important, though, to say that a lot of companies do this, but they don't keep records of it. And it's incredibly important because when an accident happens, the assumption is that the employer wasn't doing enough to prevent the accident. But sometimes the employer is doing enough to prevent the accident, they just haven't kept a record of it. So when WorkSafe arrive on site and they say, show me the records of this, show me your paperwork that proves you've got a health and safety culture, people go, we don't have the paperwork because we didn't keep it. So it's really important that doing these things is not enough. You also have to keep records of what you do so that you can show that you comply if there's ever been an incident on site.
Okay, and that kind of goes back to the safety culture ladder where it shows that having like a checkbox compliance mentality is not enough for a positive safety culture, but it's still really important as a foundation for your positive safety culture.
It certainly is. Yeah. If you have a checkbox culture, you might be able to point to documents that were good a year ago or good 2 years ago, but WorkSafe will say, what have you done in the last month, the last 3 months, the last 6 months? And at that point, you haven't got any documents to back up what you have been doing.
Okay. So what comes after compliance?
Well, the second element is leadership. And leadership sets the tone. If the leadership of an organization cares about safety, everyone cares about safety. If the leadership prioritizes safety, then everyone prioritizes safety. So as employers, you'll see on the slide the 3 laws of human behavior. You come up against these 3 laws every single day. Every employee is governed by them because they're universal. They govern all of us. So even you guys sitting here listening to this presentation at some level are ruled by these 3 laws of human behavior. So let's have a look at them because they really do impact on health and safety quite a lot. So law 1 says behavior tends to follow the status quo unless it's acted on by a decrease in friction or an increase in fuel. So you might hear Newton's first law of physics there. And the reality is that behavior won't change unless things get made easier or more effort is put in. So if you want change, you have to make the discomfort of change actually more comfortable, easier to go through than the discomfort of staying the same. or you have to make the rewards for change so great that people are motivated to get out of their comfort zones and make the changes that are required. The second rule is that behavior is a function of the person and their environment. So often what we do is we require people to change, or we talk to them and say, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, but we don't change the environment in which they work. And behavior is always a function of both of those things. So we need to realize that there are lots of factors that result in people continuing with poor safety behavior, even when you've told them to do something completely different. Those kind of things can be, for example, having a team leader who insists that something's done a certain way, whether or not it's safe. Having trainers in the company who train the shortcuts and train the other ways of doing things that are not the right way of doing things. Also, perhaps rewarding the wrong things as a company. So you give your performance bonuses for speed, not safety, or you give your performance bonuses for cost savings and not quality. Those are motivational factors that make people behave in certain ways that you may not really want them to behave, but the environment is pushing them in that direction. And it takes real dedicated leadership to shift that environment to make a new environment for people. And the third rule, which is for every decision made, there are trade-offs and the potential for unintended consequences. This is about the fear an employee has of doing something that management don't approve of. So people will always try and create the simplest, most predictable path for themselves with the least consequences to themselves if something goes wrong. And that means they tend not to try new things. They tend to stick with what they know works, even if it's incorrect, which is better the devil you know than the devil you don't. So when management penalizes employees for consequences for trying something new, this reduces creativity, it decreases trust, and makes people abdicate their responsibility and say, well, if you don't want me to do anything, then I'll wait for you to make the change and I'll just do what you tell me. And a new culture around health and safety is hard to create if that's how we work. We have to reward initiative. We have to reward creativity, even if it's not immediately beneficial. Because what we really want is the culture. The culture is the beneficial thing. And that's what we have to reward. So when people start taking risks and trying to create ways of making the workplace safer and risking, not safety, but risking the disapproval of management, we need to create an environment where it's good for them to do that, and we reward them for doing that because it means they will be creative about a new safety culture.
Nice. I guess that kind of leads to participation as well then.
It does. So once people are actually empowered to be part of a safety culture, they can then participate actively in it. So what you see on the screen before you there is the change process, really. But the key thing about it is number 5, which is employee ownership, because a leader can do 1, 2, 3, and 4, and everything grinds to a halt when nobody buys into what you want to do. So it's incredibly important that when you get to level 5, you are absolutely driving and pursuing employee ownership of health and safety as a key fundamental of success. So if workers are involved, they are the solution to your safety problems. A well-chosen champion provides a relatable motivational focal point, and the change process creates the strategy, the structure, and the goals that a company can measure itself against. But when it gets to workers and employee ownership, we have to realize that most employees know more about health and safety in the workplace than managers do. They are the ones who can tell us the safest and the best way to do things if they have the power to do so. So it's really about creating that opportunity for employees to get involved in health and safety, in designing safe processes, and making suggestions about safe processes. And a good manager knows this and empowers them to be part of the solution, so that when they bring their own efforts to the table, the employees feel valued and appreciated in developing their own safety culture. And the fourth one is about proactive improvement. Now, most safety cultures, you'll hear the words continuous or continual improvement quite a lot. And that's a key feature of a compliant safety system. But continual improvement in most safety systems is a rearward looking thing. It's looking in the rearview mirror to see what's gone wrong in order to prevent it going wrong again in future. And coming back to a driving analogy, that's like driving forward by looking in the rearview mirror. It's not actually the right way to avoid an accident in future. It can help you a little bit, but the best thing to do is to be anticipating and predicting what could go wrong before it actually happens. So currently safety systems work through review, and the continuous improvement is about looking at incidences and accidents that have happened, hazard observations that have come up in the workplace, hazard reports that have been made, looking at what's gone wrong in the past to try and make sure it doesn't happen again in future. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what it does mean is it means that employers are willing to accept the risk of an employee getting hurt in order to learn how to stop the next employee getting hurt. And a proactive safety culture tries to prevent anybody getting hurt, tries to prevent any incident happening, so that there is no risk of anybody getting hurt or anybody being placed at risk, because the safety culture is anticipating and learning in advance of the issues. It's really important to remember that nobody's the first one to ever go through these issues. Other businesses have been through this before. There's articles out there, there's case law, there's everything we can do to understand how this issue, or whatever the safety issue is, has been handled by other companies. We can learn from those companies. We don't have to invent the wheel for ourselves. Why would we risk injury to our own people when we can learn from others who've already been through that process how best to prevent it? And that's the idea behind a proactive safety culture.
Cool. That's a good point, I think, as well, about you don't have to just look inside your own organization, you can look outside your organization as well. And it's definitely helpful for me anyway. It really helps to understand the concept of a positive safety culture and how to build one by breaking it down into those 4 kind of elements of compliance, leadership, participation, and continual proactivity.
Indeed.
I also think it would really help to look at some present day examples as well. We've got about 10 minutes left. And as you kind of said at the beginning when we started this presentation, the workplace has changed a lot since the pandemic hit last year. We're almost at the 1-year anniversary since New Zealand first went into lockdown. So I guess my question is, what are some of the major changes that have been impacting health and safety management for employers over the last year? And can you provide some practical tips to build a safety culture that would manage the new risks that these trends are bringing to the workplace?
Sure. Well, it's quite a shock to realize it's been a year. Hey, it's the 10th of March today.
Yeah.
And in 2 weeks' time, it will be 1 year since we entered lockdown. And a lot has happened in that time. So basically, I think there's 5 main areas where there are significant changes in the workplace. If you look at articles online, you'll see 20, 30 different trends. But on the whole, there's 5 real trends that have impacted the workplace. One is the shift to remote working, whether that's fully remote working or a hybrid or flexible model. Second is an increased focus on safety and hygiene. The third is the mental health and wellness issues that have largely cropped up from people feeling isolated and working at home alone. The fourth is a balance of power shift between applicants towards applicants, not employers. In other words, it's people are making decisions about who they work for, and applicants are choosing their employers more than employers are choosing their employees. And that's a really important thing, because applicants nowadays are looking for that cultural fit. They're looking for a place that they can feel valued, and they're feeling like they've got the power to make that choice far more. And that comes down to a lot of the changes around working from home, because people are feeling like they've got something that really works for them. And they don't want to lose that to go back into workplace if they don't have to. So if there's an employer offering a flexible working environment and one who's not, the applicants feel powerful enough in this transaction to choose the one who lets them work flexibly if that's what they want to do. And the fifth thing is a real shift towards local. And this affects a lot of businesses because through the pandemic, I think communities and industries have been forced to turn inwards to find their own resourcing locally, to find new customers locally, to find ways of doing things locally. And I think that's become a real factor in 2021 and forward, is that businesses are remembering their local suppliers, their local constituents, and there's a whole trend towards working more locally. So those are the 5 main things. But I think if we're going to look at something valuable for us in this workshop, we can look at 2. And that would be looking at the shift to working remotely, whether it's the fully or hybrid model, and secondly, the issues around safety and hygiene.
Cool. As I'm really interested in understanding a bit more about safety culture and remote working, being a remote worker myself.
As I think a lot of people are. And you can see behind me my home office as well. So I share these risks and I share these suggestions from real life.
Yeah.
Mostly the Lego one because I have young ones at home. So looking at the screen in front of you, you'll see a list of different risks and health and safety issues that can arise from working at home. So I won't read them all out to you, but obviously managing workplace health and safety in remote locations is notoriously difficult. It's somebody's home, and employers, while they have a responsibility for health and safety, are trying to figure out how they can actually do that when it feels like an invasion of somebody's home to go in and say, well, this is not safe and that's not safe. And the reality is an employer can't really do that, but they still have the responsibility to be responsible for health and safety. So if an employee has a health and safety incident at home, it might well be that the employer is responsible for that. And the question really is, how does an employer take care of their responsibilities in this confusing environment of home offices? Some home offices are cobbled together out of available resources. So you might have employees who work from a dining room table that is a dining room chair. And while that might be comfortable for half an hour at mealtime, it's not comfortable for a full day of work. You might have issues around stairs and handrails that are not suitable in a workplace, but they're fine in a house. You might have offices where, I mean, if I look around my home office now, I need 12 to 15 power points in order to manage my screens and my printers and my computers and my phone chargers and all that. No room in a house has 12 to 15 power points, but that's easily done in an office. So the question of power supply becomes a serious issue. And the employer is always responsible for health and safety in the workplace. So this is a really important thing to get right.
Also, what are some practical tips?
Well, obviously paperwork. I've come back to that often, and that is really a big issue because it shows it's a paper trail, it's an audit trail that demonstrates that you've done what you need to do as an employer. So it's difficult, like I said, when you're doing it for a home-based environment, but we have to remember we employ adults. We employ people who are capable of managing themselves and capable of looking after themselves. So we need to trust the employees. And what we want them to do is to fill out the paperwork and show that they've done what we've asked them to do around health and safety in their home office. Okay, so we need to make the paperwork simple, but thorough and consistent. Every single person who works from home needs to complete the paperwork. And if you're worried about inspections, well, people have mobile phones, and it's possible to say, show me a before and after photograph of how you fixed the health and safety issue. You don't have to have an inspector going into someone's home to check on health and safety. We trust them and we ask them to send through photographs so we have proof that they've done the thing they need to do. The other important thing is to get a risk register out there so that people know what the health and safety risks are. For example, I mentioned 12 PowerPoints in an office. People may not realize that certain power boards where you can add in 4 or 5 or 6 plugs actually aren't health and safety rated. So they need to know that there's a particular kind of power board that is safe to use to power all of their office equipment, and it will trip out, for example, if there's an overload, whereas some other power boards won't, and they'll cause a fire. Yeah. So going through these health and safety risks and making sure that all the employees are aware of those health and safety risks, aware how to solve those health and safety risks, means that the company has done what it should have done to solve the problem. Okay, having a checklist that people can go through and say, have I done this? Have I done that? Have I checked for trip hazards? Have I taped down my power extensions? Have I, cleared up the Lego every morning after my toddler had a game the night before? All these things are really, really important to make sure that the workplace stays safe. Okay, and then the other thing as well is to remember that we're not in a community where people can see issues going on in each other's life and fix them. There's no peer pressure because we're working from a home office sometimes. People need to stay motivated. So it's really important to have chats, to keep reminding people, to follow up on things, and to make sure that there's a culture of we're all in this together, even if we have to work from home alone.
Great. Okay. So I've taken some notes. So you need policies, the right working from home checklists, they need to be accessible and easy to understand. And then kind of what you're saying about managers need to be active and speaking to their team, maybe having
Yep.
virtual consultations about what people are finding safe or unsafe and what's working and what's not working.
Very much so. It's very useful to put a Zoom call together like this and just have everybody sit together and talk about things and figure out how to keep each other safe by sharing their own experiences.
Yeah, I love that idea. Okay, so what about workplace hygiene and health and safety at work?
Well, that's kind of a weird one, but with a pandemic on the go, I think people have really realized that this is a big issue. And I read an article the other day which talked about how there's been almost zero flu or influenza around the world this last year.
Mm-hmm.
And what it has highlighted is how transmissible COVID-19 is, because we've still had COVID-19, but we've had almost zero flu, which means that we're dealing with a really infectious little bug. Um, so health and safety around hygiene has become really, really important in the workplaces. We may not feel that in New Zealand because we are not struggling so much with community level transmission, but around the world, this has become a really significant factor. And I think if we're going to keep ourselves safe and stay in this level 1 or level 2 environment that we've got for ourselves, then focusing on this is really important as well, even if we don't have community transmission. So the risks we face as a business are the lackadaisical attitude that we treat it like, oh, she'll be right. Not thinking about vulnerable people. And I want to highlight this one because you may not have somebody vulnerable in your workplace, but they might have somebody vulnerable in their house at home. So again, this is an environment where the whole person, including aspects of their life that we may not have cared about before, suddenly become significant factors in the face of such a transmissible disease as COVID-19. The other thing is also being proactive about absenteeism. So we're going to ask people, or the government is asking people, stay home if you're a little bit ill. So somebody who has a sniffle and a cold would normally come to work and put in a good solid day's work. But in this environment, they're going to stay home to keep their colleagues safe. And we need to learn to appreciate that as an employer. So those are the main things I want to draw out of this. So obviously, it's really important that we look at health and safety in a new light. Now, what I've got here for you are some practical tips around that. And I guess one of the key things I want us to think about is, it's very easy to say, well, employees must clean up their workplace, and that's yes, that's true, but it's also a negative dynamic if we're making people take on the responsibility of cleaning up after each other too much. And that's why I suggest we hire professional cleaners. We don't want employees to become each other's police. We don't want employees to become each other's caretakers and clean up after each other. It just creates unnecessary tension and friction in the work environment. So hiring professional cleaners means they use professional grade products. They have service level agreements where they're going to keep the workplace clean to a particular level that we pay for. And that takes the pressure off employees to keep the workplace safe. They can get on with their jobs, and people who are trained professionals around cleaning can do that a whole lot better. The other thing that I want companies to look at is over communication and oversupply of information and of cleaning materials. Because what happens is that often you'll have gone into a kitchen and there's no paper towels, there's no towels, there's no soap, and everyone goes, oh, sorry, we'll go get some more of that. But the reality is, in an environment where you've got COVID-19, you want there to be always sufficient cleaning materials and always sufficient information so that there's never a gap in the system. The other thing, which is a really weird little thing, but really made a difference to me, is when you buy detergents and when you buy soap for your employees, buy stuff they like to use. So get something skin friendly, get something that makes them feel good to use it, because if it doesn't feel good to use, they won't use it. So getting something that actually makes them want to go back and use it again is a really important part of a healthy and a hygiene-friendly environment. The other thing is people love being the first person to use a fabric towel, but they hate being the second person to use a fabric towel. So fabric towels are probably not a good idea. You might want to invest in paper towels so that everyone feels like they are not picking up someone else's secondhand fabric towels and all that.
Yeah.
And an important thing as well is the government is really communicating well around hygiene. They're putting a lot of guidelines out there. But some of them are inconvenient for employers, like the one of staying away when you've got a little sniffle. Don't force employees to do what's not in the government guidelines. Don't force them to be unsafe according to government guidelines, because they will build up a resistance to what you want, and they will think that you as an employer don't really care about them if the government cares about things, but you say don't do that. So it's really important to not contravene government guidelines.
Okay. I'm just conscious of the time. We're just a little bit over. So
sorry about that.
If we were just going to, oh, no problem. It's been really, really interesting. I guess I was just wondering if you could summarize what we've learned today. What are some of the key things to walk away from this presentation with?
Right. Well, I think that the important thing is that compliance is the absolute minimum that is needed, but it's also the foundation for going to a much higher level of a positive, proactive safety culture. So the paperwork is important, and keeping good records is really, really important. And it's going to be the difference between being able to show that you've done everything you should have done, and that you were doing it but can't prove it, which is the same as not doing it at all. Okay. So that's the important thing. Compliance and keeping good paper records and record keeping is incredibly important. But the other thing which is also important is that nobody ever creates a positive safety culture by themselves. It's a team effort. And unfortunately, for some, teams take effort. So this is a change process that's going to require a commitment. That's going to require you to understand change dynamics, change management dynamics, to build a strategy and to see it through and work to those strategies and principles so that the change actually happens in your workplace. Learn from others, work at the right pace to make the changes stick, and then stick with it until you've got a different safety culture. And that's really important. Stick with it.
Awesome. Thanks, Vaughan. There we have it, folks. Vaughan's just given us some great information on how to build a safety culture at work in 2021. And I'm sorry we went a little bit over time, but I hope that everyone got what they needed from this session today. And before we leave, one last thing, I just wanted to remind everyone here that we'll be offering you our health and safety survival guide at the end of the session. The ebook covers all the essential steps to health and safety compliance that you need to know, so that you can manage your health and safety with confidence and focus more on building or strengthening your safety culture in your business. We'll also be offering everyone here today a free workplace health check with our HR Assured New Zealand telephone advisory team. If you're lucky, you might get to talk to Vaughan. So you will hear from one of our team members, Kerry, who will just give you a call to check in and see what you thought about this webinar. And if you have any questions or employment matters that you might need some advice on, he can book you in for a call about that. So yeah, thank you again for joining us today. And Vaughan, thank you again for all the information and the presentation. If anyone has any questions about this webinar or on safety, health and safety at work or safety culture, we're the experts in that kind of thing. So our contact details are at the end of this presentation. And hopefully we see you again at the next webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.